I want to adjust the camera. The camera, see how it's so far over here to the, well, you know.
I think you can manually override it, but.
Well, do you know how to do it on there without pushing the wrong button? Oh, gosh, that doesn't sound very promising.
We are now on the air, so to speak, so we'll get started. Don't forget to do what I'm doing right now. Turn off your phones. And otherwise pretend that I'm not here and you can't hear me, so. All right, let's get started. Madam Clerk, you want to roll us out?
Bell. Curran. Freeling. Harrison. Hinkleman. Majerick. Ott. Pittsburgh. Walrath. Werfel. Scarborough. Elliott.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 10 present, 2 absent.
Thank you. Minutes from a week ago. Anybody want to?
Make a motion to approve.
Moved by Commissioner Volrath.
Support.
Don't be shy. Supported by Commissioner Hinkleman. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved. Requisition review.
I just remembered that I left it upstairs. Did anybody have any question about the requisitions list? Or, okay, I'll go grab that and we can pass it around. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll leave that one.
Brian is out helping someone do something. Why don't we, Bob, why don't we reverse order? Why don't you go first? And then we'll do the audit recap.
So we sent out the cover memo, a survey form, and then a database that summarizes what the other county boards are, their meeting schedule. So I hope that was informative and you know, gave you an appreciation for what other county boards are doing. So as part of the PHS work plan, we look at some of the bylaw stuff. We look at meeting schedule has been brought up a number of times to us individually and collectively. And then we had gathered the data from the Michigan Association of Counties, looked back at our history and the like. And so the survey form is intended to get the collective wisdom of the board and towards changing the frequency of our meetings. So I think we're all aware we meet basically weekly. And when you look at what the other counties are doing, they've got different schedules and different processes. And so the question is the board interested in making a change to something other than weekly meetings? So the idea is that if indeed you are interested, then we proceed with gathering additional information and start to talk about how that might happen. If indeed you are not interested in making a change, then we just put that aside and continue on as we have. So does anyone have any questions regarding where we started with this and where we're at as of today?
So just to thank you for doing the work. Appreciate it very much.
What I would prefer you do then is to take the survey form that's attached to the memo and fill it out before you leave today. Before you leave, should I be very clear? Before you leave today. You don't have to put your name on it. And then we'll collect them and then take a look at what the responses are.
Who do you hand them to?
If you want to hand them to me, yeah, I think you can trust me. I won't lose them. So then I'll give them to Shelley in HR to compile, and then we'll talk about where we go from here.
Questions, comments?
Appreciation to Annette and Shelley for doing a lot of the data gathering and legwork. So.
Yes, sir.
Just like to publicly say that I've already finished.
I'm very proud of Commissioner Pitchford. Thank you. So I do know what your writing looks like, so I'll know how you.
You get a gold star.
Okay, that would then conclude my part of the agenda.
So when would you like these back?
I'll be, succinct.
So anytime, right?
Today,
Whenever we have time.
before you leave the meeting right now. So, yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Very good.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Looking at this made me think when I came on the board as a young feller, not quite as young as Chokwe, but pretty close. We had committee meetings every week. And then the statute says the board must meet at least monthly, the full board. So we would always have a board meeting the third Thursday of the month over in the courthouse. And we had the end of the third floor that they now call the fourth floor for some reason. I don't know why. The basement's the basement, not the first floor, but what do I know? Anyway, we had that end where the front of the court is now. And we would read every resolution aloud. And the meetings were rather long. When Dick Bartz came on the board, he was the one who suggested, why don't we do a consent calendar? And then if we need to pull something for individual attention, we can, but otherwise we can streamline the process. But we had committee meetings weekly, one board meeting a month. And then we started feeling pressure because we weren't able to get everything done in one monthly meeting without spilling on into the afternoon. So committees definitely, having weekly committee meetings was helpful. What we do going forward, I guess, is something we all have to figure out. But appreciate your efforts and Annette's and Shelley's and all concerned. So, okay, Brian is still taking care of a matter involving another department. So why don't we go ahead with the audit recap?
Really quickly, just make a motion, agreement. I have copies of the report. Skip. I hate to say. So, Nathan Balderman, Raymond, is your partner, right?
Yeah.
I never get this right, but he's going to talk about our audit. A copy of the audit I have available to you. Should already have copies that were in your box, but if you want to see it as we're talking about it, I have extra copies here. Is anybody interested?
Let you know.
Okay, that's fine. Then, okay.
If anybody wants copies, then you're just gonna set them there for the time being.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You do, yes, sir. You've had them. It's been about.
Good morning, Nate.
Good morning.
thank you for your time this morning. For this morning's meeting, my plan was just to kind of talk about the overall results of the audit, focus on really the audit piece of it rather than the financial results, but talk about the results, a little bit about what was different this year for the audit, and then touch the audit and the management letter in terms of any findings or comments that we had for this year's audit. So in terms of the overall audit, the financial statements this year, we did issue a clean opinion on the financial statements or an unmodified opinion. That's what you're looking for when you're getting an audit, is you're looking for that unmodified opinion so that you can rely on the financial statements. Means that the financial statements were fairly stated in all material respects. There's a level of materiality we have to look at when we're looking at things, so so that it's not super expensive to do this, even more so than what it is. We're not looking at every transaction, but we are looking for things to make sure they're materially correct. That'll also come into play. There's some items related to past adjustments that we'll talk about when we get to the management letter. The one big change we had this year in terms of accounting standards was we had to implement, or management technically had to implement, a new standard for subscription-based information technology arrangements, or SPITA is what they call it, or SBITA. I don't know. They can't determine how they're going to pronounce the acronym, but it's basically leases for IT and software type arrangements where you're going out on the cloud and using something, you're using somebody else's software. So that had to be implemented this year. That was the latest standard for this year. So there were some changes related to that in the financial statements. There will be a note on that in the footnotes. So that was the biggest change from an accounting perspective. From overall looking at things on an accounting or on what we had to look at in a compliance basis, we continue to have to look at the same types of grants, those types of things. We're still looking at the ARPA or FRF funding as well. So in the single audit, that's the smaller document. When you look at that, there is the schedule of findings and question costs has a summary of auditors results. That's the place that I always point people to, because that really gives almost a one-page summary of what we did for the audit. And it, eliminates all that, you having to read through all the language that we have in the report that's got a lot of legalese and accountantese involved in it. But it just summarizes it in a tabular format. So there's two parts to our audit. We have the financial statement and audit, like I talked about. And then we also have the federal awards audit, where we're looking at compliance with federal, for the federal grants that you have. So on the financial statement audit, we had the unmodified opinion. We also look at internal controls as a part of our audit. But we're not issuing an opinion on those internal controls. But we're required under standards, if things come to our attention that raise to a level of what we would consider to be either a material weakness or a significant deficiency, and that really speaks to the relative risk that's out there and any issues that we identify, and whether the risk that you have, even if it's not an actual thing that we saw, but the risk that's out there raises to the level where you could have either a material misstatement or a significant misstatement, we have to make that assessment. We did have two findings this year in the audit. One that we consider to be a material weakness, and one that we consider to be a significant deficiency. So the material weakness was related to the Act 51 reporting in the road department. It actually was one of those things that kind of held things up towards the end of the audit and pushed us right to the end. And in the end, there were modifications made to that Act 51 report after. There were modifications that were done afterwards. We had to come in, we looked at it, said that it was, again, talking about materiality, we were able to take what the information was there. It wasn't reconciling completely to what we expected to when we were doing our audit procedures, but it was close enough for us to be able to say, we can still issue this report. The statements are still materially correct, but there's still issues that we identified that throughout that process that needed to be corrected. So I know I've had subsequent meetings with Brian and Doug talking about how to resolve that going forward. We also have reviewed the subsequent report that was issued, the Act 51 report that was completed with the corrections, that kind of stuff in August, and have a good idea of what those issues are. And we'll be working with Doug and team going forward to make sure that there's a plan in place and that those can get corrected going forward. So that was the first one. The second one was related to audit adjustments that came up during the audit. Anytime, by definition, one of the things, as we're looking at things, when we see if there's a material audit adjustment or a material weakness or significant deficiency, is if we detect something during our audit and management hasn't identified it, by definition, that's some type of deficiency because we found it, management didn't. And so there were some items that we considered to be audit adjustments. Those items were posted. So the financial statements were corrected, but because we saw them, we have to, by definition, include it as a finding. So those were the two findings for this year on the financial statements. We also, as I said, there's the second side on the compliance audit. Happy to report we didn't have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies or findings of any type on non-compliance. The two programs we tested this year through our risk, we have to go through a risk assessment process to determine what programs we're going to test. We tested WIC, and then we tested that coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, or the ARPA funds, and didn't have findings on either of those matters. And then the last part of the report, and that single audit report, is a schedule of prior audit findings. A lot of the questions we get in these types of meetings is, well, did you look at what we had last year for findings and report on those? We do have a schedule in the back that talks about that. Technically, it's a management schedule, but we sign off on it. So you can see there on certain items, the audit adjustment finding was a repeat, but the other three findings, there were two related to the Drain Commission last year. Both of those have been resolved. And I know there had been one that had been on there for a few years that has been resolved. Also an item related to internal controls over the inventory counts of the road department that was also resolved. So, and then the last part of our report, of what we report, is in what we call the independent auditors communication with those charged with governance. This letter has a bunch of stuff that under standards we have to report to you. So we put it in a letter to make sure it gets reported. A lot of this stuff is just standard, what an audit is, what kind of responsibilities management has, what we have. Any changes to accounting policies are included. So there's a statement related to the subscription-based information technology arrangements. Also talks about significant accounting estimates. And I guess it would be worth noting as well, the other part of things that changed, the accounting standards changed. We had to implement the subscription-based information technology arrangements, but we also had a change in auditing standards this year. So we had to do things a little bit differently this year from our aspect of what's required under us. They do that probably every, 10, 15, 20 years. There's some fairly significant change in auditing standards. They're always changing them, but an overall approach for audits and how we assess risk, that's a big part of it. The other thing, some of the IT requirements changed. Again, more of an emphasis as I look back at my career and as things have gone, I started out my career, yes, we had IT, but it wasn't nearly what it is now. And I'm sure it will continue to be what changes in the auditing world going forward, but there were some changes related to that as well. And that's somewhat reflected. If you go to attachment A, there's comments and recommendations. These items that we include in the letter are things that don't raise to the same level of significant deficiency and material weakness, may not even be a specific control weakness, but it might be an area where we say, well, you could enhance your controls or improve things somewhat if you added these types of controls in place. So we actually had two different ones that were related to EIT assessments that we're doing. And then we had a couple of other internal control suggestions related to subrecipient monitoring, as well as purchasing card policies that are in place. So then the very last thing that I would make mention of is the very last page of that report. There's a schedule of adjustments passed. The schedule of adjustments passed is those items that we talked about before, where there's some items where either something couldn't be reconciled or there's a specific, sometimes in an audit, we're going through the audit and whether it's due to timing or to overall materiality and the cost that it would take to implement something, management might make the decision. It's just not, worth making this. It does, and we have to look at that, assess that, and determine whether that's material to financial statements. If it's over what we call our scope for past adjustments, we have to put it on that schedule just to make sure that people understand that there were past adjustments in that process. So there were some items related to that are on that last page. So that's all I had. Again, I guess I would add, continue to enjoy working with the county. I mean, I think through that process, you always have those issues that come up, like the road department that came up, but working with Doug and his team and with Brian of walking through that, there was no question. We knew where we wanted to get and how we wanted to improve, that there wanted to be improvements going forward. But I just, the way that they worked through that process and through the overall audit process, I think it went well. And I look forward to continuing to work with the county through that process. So.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Balderman? Yes, sir.
I don't know if it's a question for you, but question for you maybe.
Yeah.
The Act 51.
Yep.
You guys feel comfortable with the plan? Are you building it or you have it? Where are you at?
So what we've done is, number one, we've acquired an update to the road department software that should ensure that next year's Act 51 reporting is a smoother, easier process. Number two, we have made clear to road department management that we'll be doing monthly check-ins to ensure that any areas where they're behind is caught very early, so that if they need assistance, that they will have assistance, so that they're not scrambling towards the end of their reporting year. Between myself and Doug, we have been engaged in talks with Nate's team about contracting for additional service to ensure that monthly check-ins are occurring, so that if we've got a problem, we know at the front end of the year, not the back end of the year. And then the last thing, and this is the reality. This was our first time doing the Act 51 report with some significant staffing changes. So as the board's aware, we lost our number 2 from the finance department. We had a relatively new person working as lead finance for the road department. And this is our first year doing it with that person and without the aid of the longtime number 2 from finance. So I'm confident as we look towards next year that we won't have this Act 51 report coming down to the wire. I know that from the road staff, a ton of hours went into getting the report done. I know that it was something that kept them up late and had them working through weekends. They don't want to see this occur again on a future basis. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I hope it did.
Well, it sounded like, if I can sum up, that it's a timeliness. It's mostly timeliness. It wasn't a It wasn't something of function. It was mostly timeliness. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's how I would describe it. Doug's in the room, and Doug, if you want to chime in, would you agree that it was more timing than other concerns?
There was timing concern, if I can. There was, some transitional, institutional knowledge that didn't get transferred fully. Well, however, what we have done is we now have an improved tool
Yeah.
to execute this. So, and we set up some things for the accounting process to address it. If it becomes a problem, this year, I will be rather surprised indeed. Yeah. But we are checking in with them on status. We will be checking in with them on status. Somewhere in the October timeframe, I'm going to review what they've got. So we make sure that we don't have this issue again.
We're also back at a fuller strength, both in the finance department as well as at the road department. So we've got more of the empty seats now full. And I would have a high degree of confidence that you won't see the Act 51 report holding up next year's audit.
Mhm. Good. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Two questions. First off, thank you very much. The audit process, I understand, went relatively smooth, so, and we appreciate you coming here and doing what you do. My two questions, if I may. One, are there any GASB things that we need to be aware of for the horizon for our next process that we should be looking at internally, particularly for finance committee, that we can help staff?
Yeah, so in terms of new standards, there is a page on attachment B to that management letter. There's there's 4 standards that are upcoming. 2 of them come into effect this year. One is just a financial statement presentation. If there's any accounting changes, accounting errors, or the big one, change in major funds, and how things, it's more a presentation issue. That's going to be handled through the reporting processes, and it's almost more for how we make sure things are handled. The other one is compensated absences. There's a change in how compensated absences has to be recorded now, that will have to be implemented for this fiscal year. So we'll be working with Doug and his team to make sure that those changes are taken care of. These are all, that one is a government-wide financial statement issue, so it won't affect, for instance, your general fund, that type of thing. It would affect potentially enterprise funds, but I don't think you have anywhere the enterprise funds would be affected. It'd just be that government-wide financial statement. So it's more work. It's a standard that's been out there for a long time, the way that it is, and they just decided the liability is going to go up is what it's going to be, and we'll work with management of determining how to make that estimate.
Okay.
Anyone else? Did you have anything?
Just the other one, just essentially for finance committee / BC bit. So we're getting close to issuing actual payments. Bainbridge Township is coming to the end of their Comcast build out. So this year's audit, we've provided an absolute ton of documentation related to the Orinoco construction. As Bainbridge goes live with Comcast, we'll have to have a similar level of documentation so that Nate's team can see how that worked. As we get closer for the rollout of the MEC project, once again, it'll be an absolute ton of documentation to be able to show that the funds were handled properly.
Yes, ma'am.
And to that point, I'd like to say that there were no findings for the one for ARPA, the federal awards. There was no finding on that, and that is a testament to the work and the documentation that went.
Recommendation around the subrecipient monitoring.
Correct.
Put something in place. Quite honestly, we have been in a situation where we've done a lot of subrecipient work.
Right.
So even though we cleared the hurdle, we need a policy in place.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's one that as we look to the remainder of the calendar year. I know that we're going to have some work to do. MEC was able to supply us with speed tests. They were able to supply us with address lists. I'll be actively working with Comcast to ensure that all of that documentation is easily presentable. Bless you.
Bless you.
Okay, on that note, if there's nothing else, we'll go to public comments. Thank you, Nate.
Yep, thank you.
Anyone have anything they'd like to say?
Mr. Chair, I do have a quick update for the board, if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay, so for the other board, tomorrow is the big event for Veteran Services. So this will be the second year in a row they've done a military veteran stand down event. This will occur,
Pardon me.
no problem, from 9 until 1.